Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for our fourth CCA Presents events. My name is Kathy PUZEY and I'm the department head for art and design. I'm excited to introduce this week's feature, which includes USU TEDx talks by 4 of our colleagues in the Kane College of the Arts. The first talk will be by Assistant Professor Marissa Vineault from the Department of Art and Design. The title of her talk is How Contemporary Art Responds to Politics.
I recently visited the Museum of Modern Art in New York City. It is a place that in many ways serves as my refuge from the excessiveness of sensation one encounters in Midtown Manhattan. I've been to MoMA so often that a sense of home overcomes me every time I walk up the escalators and around corners. I know exactly where I will encounter Van Gogh's Starry Night, arced by tourists snapping photos on their phones to post to Instagram. I cut familiar paths through the carefully curated rooms, and my body tends to absent-mindedly track from Picasso to Duchamp to Dali to Pollock to Warhol, and so on down the trailing lineage of modern art. The works on display on the 5th floor of MoMA come from their permanent collection and tell a now standard story of the avant-garde, with attention on the radical and experimental artists of the 20th century. Here, artworks are grouped according to those avant-garde movements: Cubism, Dada, Surrealism, Abstract Expressionism, Pop, an evolutionary model reinforced through the movement of the visitor's body from room to room. The chronological ordering offers an easy entry point to modernism, as most arrive at MoMA with some familiarity of those major movements. The interpretation of modernism presented by MoMA is one I long accepted. Why would I, as a young art student or even a youngish professor, challenge MoMA, powerhouse of the art world? The story they tell through their display is one I learned, nodded with in agreement, and then repeated. I pulled highlights from their collection into my classroom. I reinforced the importance of Picasso and Warhol above all others. But in doing so, I excluded other voices outside of the canon. However, movement towards more inclusion is taking place. MoMA is not the same institution today as it was 10 or even 5 years ago. The art history I study today is not the same I studied 10 years ago. My classroom and my writing are changing in response to shifting political climates and debates, and new stories are being written about the diversity of the art world. I witnessed firsthand this turn in thought during my last visit to MoMA. For curators there recently reinstalled sections of their permanent collection in response to the presidential executive order from February, barring citizens from 7 countries from entering the United States. Seemingly overnight, curators reinstalled select rooms to incorporate work made by artists from nations on that original travel ban list. Beside each work is a label that reads, "This work is by an artist from a nation whose citizens have been or are being denied entry into the United States due to recent presidential executive orders." The names on the labels are ones that are not typically encountered in MoMA's permanent collection galleries. Parviz Tanavoli, Iranian and Canadian; Sharana Shabazi, Iranian and German; Tala Madani, Iranian and currently working in Los Angeles. Tanavoli, for example, created The Prophet in the early 1960s, at a time when he freely traveled between Tehran and Minneapolis. Without travel restrictions, he was able to encounter another culture, other voices, which helped shape his approach to art making. The relevance for our particular moment is hard to miss. Had Tanavoli been working right now, his body would have been prohibited from crossing borders. The cross-cultural exchange would have never happened. So rather than promoting art and artists as isolated and nationalistic, the rearrangement shows a world of connections and cross-cultural discussions. In doing so, MoMA refutes the current administration's claim that safety comes through cultural exclusion and highlights the way that art is always politically motivated, politically relevant, and politically necessary. A few days after visiting MoMA, I crossed a series of borders to attend DOCUMENTA, a contemporary art event staged every 5 years over the span of 100 days in Kassel, Germany. In one of those fascinating twists of fate, I took the same travel path I had in the summer of 1994 when I made my first solo overseas trip. Age 16, I wasn't too concerned with my safety. I certainly never gave pause to consider how easily my passport was granted to me and how effortlessly I moved through customs and border security. But 23 years later, again flying from New York City to Frankfurt, I was acutely aware of my privilege as a traveler across borders. I freely moved without disruption to my body. No one detained me, questioned me at length, or flagged my identity. Rather, I sailed through passport control without a second look, as had always happened before. And why? The only answer is the color of my skin and the nationality of my passport, which allows me a shield of freedom to move between spaces on my own accord. Once in Kassel, I wandered the sprawling city, home of DOCUMENTA since 1955. Modern art needed new supporters in the years after World War II, especially in Germany, where the Nazi Party had condemned any art not seen as beautiful or ideal. DOCUMENTA aimed to return a positive status to modern art, which the Nazis had labeled degenerate. Art and politics have thus, from the beginning, been at the forefront of DOCUMENTA, and this year was no exception. Borders and the movement of bodies was an overarching theme throughout the exhibitions. Germany has welcomed over 1 million refugees since 2015, and much of the art at DOCUMENTA acknowledged this opening of borders. Olu Ogwibe's Monument for Strangers and Refugees, a 54-foot tall obelisk erected in the public plaza, bears the inscription, "I was a stranger and you took me in German, Turkish, Arabic, and English. The obelisk now functions as a meeting place in the city, taking in all who pass by. It is located just a few blocks from the Friedrichsmuseum, the historically primary venue of DOCUMENTA and, significantly, the first publicly accessible art museum in Europe. The facade of the Friedrichsmuseum is typically inscribed with the name of the building in gilded font. But this year, Banu Chinatolu's "Being Safe is Scary" replaced the traditional dedication, aligning contemporary art in its display with contemporary politics. I walked by Ogwibe and Chinatolu's work repeatedly during my days and evenings in Kassel. I read "I was a stranger and you took me in" and "Being safe is scary" countless times, considering the political connections between the two statements. A desire for safety makes us fear the stranger, which is precisely the argument put forth by our current administration and their claim for the travel ban. This desire for safety, however, is also scary, for it closes us off from the stranger and from the unknown. What we should be scared of is maintaining borders of exclusion, where we may never encounter what is foreign to us. We must keep borders open to allow for the movement of bodies, the free flow of ideas, and the exchanges of culture. Movement allows us to breathe, and to breathe in another's viewpoint. Art is one such way for us to see the world through another's eyes, however different they may be. Art is just so absolutely human in that way. It is of us and reflects us, carrying the weight of history and the anticipation of the future within. To see art in the service of politics in our contemporary moment is neither new nor extraordinary. Art has always been there conversing with the world, sometimes silent, other times protestingly loud. Artists are the translators and the messengers of our shared environment. They show us that art's purpose is not towards beauty and idealism, but towards the world and all its messy politics. It is our role as viewers to listen to that art and to take in the stranger. This is what art at the service of politics aims for. I hear you and I accept you. Art structures my worldview, and institutions such as MoMA, my artistic home, have long influenced my understanding of modernism. Museums historically provide a space of relief for quiet contemplation, free from the distractions of the world, especially during times of war and civil strife. Yet museums, and specifically art, have long engaged with broader societal concerns during these moments of political conflict. MoMA was the first major art museum to respond to the US travel ban, and others in the art world, including artists, critics, writers, and curators, quickly followed. By recognizing the interwoven discourse of art and politics, we can move away from an isolationist approach. We must fight the impulse towards exclusion and recognize what artists have always told us. What is strange is not scary. It is art.
Next, we will hear from Jason Spelbring. Jason is an associate professor of acting in our theater department. The title of his talk is What Your Movements Say About Your Character.
How movement creates character. I started gymnastics when I was 9 years old. I didn't belong to a gymnastics studio. I didn't even have a coach. I taught myself. You see, I grew up in a very small town in Northern California. In fact, the 64 students that I entered kindergarten with were the same 64 students I graduated high school with 13 years later. I, like many kids my age, first saw gymnastics on the television, and I was absolutely mesmerized by watching these athletes hurl themselves across this giant blue mat, defy gravity on the parallel bars, and hold themselves with statue-like stillness on the still rings. My 9-year-old self thought, oh, I could do that. I was lucky. I grew up right next to an elementary school, so the open fields of green grass became my blue mats. The playground equipment quickly became my parallel bars, and the metal rings on that equipment became my still rings. I would spend long summer nights teaching myself to do the perfect handstand, to do a round-off, a cartwheel, back handspring. I even taught myself how to do a standing back tuck. After weeks and weeks of trial and error and bruises and near broken bones, I would invite my parents over to watch my Olympic-style routine full with floor exercise and rings and bars, and my dad was impressed, if not a little bit confused. My mom was terrified. Today, I am an actor and a professor of acting. My days of throwing myself across green lawns is long over, but my connection to the movement of that lives with me today. That 9-year-old boy is still alive in me. And it continued through my education, both undergrad and graduate training as an actor. Whether I was in a stage combat class where I had to fence or learn how to use a broadsword, or a musical theater ensemble class where I was required to learn choreography, or even in a clown class where I had to create fully fleshed out, real red-nosed clowns. Movement is part of my character. Character. It's a great word. There are many definitions, but there are two that are of particular interest to me. The first one is one of the qualities or features that distinguish or make up an individual. You. Your character, back there. Me, my character. The other is a part an actor recreates. Both of these definitions are important to me both as an actor and a professor, but also to my talk today on how movement creates character. It was in my graduate movement class that I was first introduced to something called contact improvisation. First established by an American dancer named Steve Paxton. Mr. Paxton, like me, had a very early connection to tumbling in gymnastics. He later went on to become a very well-known American dancer and choreographer, but he continued his development of this new dance form called contact improvisation. In the early 1980s, a lot of top graduate training programs were adopting contact improvisation within their movement curriculum, which is where I, thankfully, was introduced to it. Now, the basic tenets of contact improvisation are pretty simple. While partnered up, participants begin the exploration of gravity, momentum, inertia, while using only their bodies to communicate, pressure, touching, lifts. Mr. Paxton firmly believed that even the non-dancer could contribute to this form. Now, I have been teaching contact improvisation for the better part of 10 years, and there are 3 consistent discoveries that my students tend to make when connecting contact improvisation to the creation of a character for the stage. And the first one is, it allows them to discover their kinesthetic awareness, their awareness of their own bodies moving through space. Second, contact improvisation unlocks their emotional life, their emotional connection, not just with themselves engaged in contact, but with their partner. And 3, actors are more willing to connect their physical bodies to the scene work they are doing in class or in performance. I would like to provide you with some examples of what I do in the classroom. So if you'll help me welcome second-year BFA actors Madeline and Becca to the stage, that would be great. Hello, ladies. Come right here. Come right in the center right there. Great. So this is going to feel like my classroom, so pardon me if I walk around and make stuff up. But here's what happens, is they're going to explore 3 different bullet points before they go into free or open form contact. Right now, they are taking each other in, which is very common in contact improvisation. They want to be in the same room together. This first area we're going to discover is going to be balance and weight distribution. So what will happen is on their own time, they will both free fall backwards and grab arms just in time to lock and hold. And you've already begun. Good, straight backs, lower shoulders. Good, from here they're going to pull themselves up, they're going to free fall again, and then grab arms one more time. Good, so what this is doing is they're learning to communicate through contact. You're pulling too much, or I need more weight from you, so pull on up, which is great. Good, well done, ladies. Next, they're going to do something where they're going to go from sitting to standing. Now, this is going to require them to communicate from the base of their spine all the way to the top of their head, not using their arms at all on the floor. They're going to communicate with their backs and come to complete standing whenever they're ready. Breathe. Good. Excellent job. Great. Thank you, ladies. The next thing we're going to explore are lifts. In my class, we do encourage lifts because sometimes contact improvisation, the improvisation part, will allow actors to sort of leave the ground, and we want them to be familiar with what that feels like. This first lift is called the monkey. Now, there's a back monkey, there's a side monkey, there's waist monkeys, but Becca's going to jump on Madeline's base, and what's going to happen is, like Velcro, Becca will stick to the back of Madeline, and what will happen is she will be able to have a full life of movement around. There shouldn't be any weight on her. Whenever you're ready. And stick. And go ahead and show us and move. Yay. Thank you. Good. Next, we're going to do a back-to-back lift. This can be done with or without arms, and for today's display, we're going to use with arms. So what will happen is they will scoop down, breathe, relax, go with the flow, don't push the tide. With a nice solid base like this Madeline has for Becca, Becca will be able to explore movement while on top. Nice. Good. Excellent. The next thing is something called trading fours. This was introduced to me by my movement master coach, Annie Louie. And basically, one of the actors will take a neutral stance that will have some negative space. The other actor will then explore that negative space by moving and then stay in contact. This is sort of like the beginnings of a real contact improv, free or open form. And you've already begun. 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, and switch, and switch, and switch, and switch, and hold. Good job, actors. So by doing these, of course, we spend more than just 3 minutes on each of these. By this time, the students are able to open up into free or open form contact improv. This begins with them taking each other in, and what we'll do is we'll just observe for a moment. Remember to go with the flow, don't push the tide, breathe, and you've already begun. Go with the flow. Oftentimes, free-form sessions are accompanied with light music, either a drum or a string instrument. Sometimes music is played. Oftentimes, acting professors will introduce text. So what I want to do for purpose of today is I want to introduce ideas or relationships that they might be able to incorporate while engaged in contact improvisation. And the first one is lovers meeting for the first time. Lovers in conflict. Breathe. Good. Lovers making up. And end. Thank you, actors, very, very much. Thank you very much. Beautiful. So what is my takeaway from this talk on movement, character, and contact improvisation? Think about this. With each of your movements, it defines your character, who you are, how you sit, how you walk, how you stand. It's the same way that an actor uses movement to create character through contact improv, through kinesthetic awareness, a deeper emotional connection, connecting their bodies to that character. I would be remiss if I didn't give you an assignment as a professor, so here it is. As you leave this hall, turn your mind's eye to how you move through space. Do you have fluidity? Are you always bumping into things? How are you in crowded airports or busy city streets? By simply turning your mind's eye onto your own movement, you will be engaging in a kind of public contact improv session. And you've already begun. Thank you.
Next, we will hear from Professor Nancy Hills. Nancy teaches costume design in our theater department. The title of her talk is Make Do and Mend.
These 1940s women include my mother in the dark suit and her sisters on a Sunday after church. The military-inspired suits and the white dress are typical garments for the Second World War. Almost a year after VE Day, these practical farm girls are dressed in their Sunday best. Basic needs include food, shelter, and clothing. It might seem irreverent to consider fashion in the context of war, but the upheaval war foists on society is always seen in the way people dress. Elements of uniforms are seen on civilian clothing. World War II disrupted the exchange of raw materials, which for clothing included wool, cotton, rubber, silk, plus leathers for shoes and durable clothing. With most able-bodied men involved in the war effort, lives of millions of women were juggled as they worked on the home front in jobs that required them to wear practical clothes. Through all of this, between air raids, after the catastrophes, and while experiencing loss, life goes on. And looking their best made people feel more normal. If we look back to problems that were solved under duress, we can find solutions that are learned in today's reduced circumstances. In the early 19th century, handsome style military uniforms trickled down and appear on these dresses as braids from 1815. Far away from any battlefield, the color and trim were a patriotic nod to the military. Similar braids and trim appear on this gown from 1865, inspired by uniforms from the Crimea War. And swags of teal cording on this plaid bodice are similar to the officer, a young Winston Churchill. On the outbreak of the First World War, women's clothes adapted to jobs, replacing men who went to the trenches. Today, we have 2 articles of clothes from that conflict commonly worn. Before the war, only women wore watches that were bracelets. Men carried their watches in pockets, and the Army wanted something much more accessible. They attached a watch dial to a web band and developed the man's wristwatch. In 1914, Burberry was commissioned by the War Office to adapt a heavy officer's coat to a waterproof cotton gabardine version, introducing the trench coat. September 3rd, 1939. Is it there? There it is. September 3rd, 1939, the United Kingdom declared war on Germany. In 41, the United States declared war on Japan, and by 45, 113 countries were involved. Britain's proximity to the war put her in great danger. With most of mainland Europe occupied, Britain needed to take a realistic assessment of her survival possibilities. The principal strategy was to attack and sink supply ships that were bound for Britain, removing raw materials, damaging industrial capabilities, and starving the nation. Clothes were affected by the scarcity of materials, including rubber, silk, wool, leather, cotton, and nylon. Japan took over rubber plantations in the Dutch West Indies. 35% of world rubber and 90% of American rubber was unavailable. The UK and the US eliminated any new rubber articles for civilians, including rubber boots, raincoats, and elastic of any kind. Asian silk was no longer available, requiring an alternative for parachutes. Silk had been used for ladies' stockings, undergarments, nightwear, men's ties, wedding dresses. All of these were replaced with other materials or done without. These are Australian sheep shearers. Britain bought the entire Australian wool harvest for the duration of the war. Wool had been extensively used for civilian and was needed for millions of uniforms. General Eisenhower is wearing his practical Ike jacket, cut down by his tailor from a wool field jacket. Millions of pairs of boots and leather flight jackets were needed, limiting leather for civilian shoes. Cotton was also used for uniforms. In the early 30s, the crew neck t-shirt was developed to wear under college football gear in Southern California. The Navy adopted this for sailors, and the Army followed with olive drab shirts. These sailors on the USS Alcor in the South Pacific are wearing white cotton t-shirts and denim dungarees. My dad is the sailor on the far left, and he wore a white cotton t-shirt for the rest of his life. Nylon became available to replace Asian silk for parachutes. In 1939, DuPont launched a new filament, briefly used for women's stockings, thereafter called nylons. After Pearl Harbor, nylon was exclusively used for the war, prompting Fats Waller to write a tune. I'll be happy when the nylons bloom again. Cotton is monotonous to men. Only way to keep affection fresh, get some mesh for your flesh. I'll be happy when the nylons bloom again. In both the UK and the US, stockings were essential to dressing up. Fabric restrictions put a new emphasis on legs, and bare legs were considered inappropriate. A popular option was leg makeup, which included painting a dark seam up the back of the legs with an eyebrow pencil. Rayon could be used to imitate silk, wool, or cotton, and was filled the gap for civilian clothes. It was the first man-made, regenerated cellulose fiber made primarily from wood pulp. Popular in the 1920s, it was essential in the 1940s. It was comfortable, dyed well, and was cool for tropical climates. The manufacturing sector retooled for the war production. Silk ribbon factories produced parachutes. Detroit built tanks and army trucks. Typewriter companies converted to machine guns. Underwear manufacturers sewed mosquito netting. Clothing manufacturing converted to military uniforms, and women filled in jobs once held by men. Munition workers, radio operators, pilots, shipbuilders, railway workers, and especially farm laborers. In Britain, the Women's Land Army recruited 80,000 women from London and the industrial north. They wore practical khaki shirts and jodhpurs, dark green wool pullovers, and sturdy shoes. Young women were trained in farm work and animal husbandry. This is Jean Harlow Flann from Liverpool, who spent the war years taking care of sheep in Lancashire. Jean lives here in Cache Valley, and her son Nick is on the faculty here at USU. Industrial doors opened for women, and it was discovered that they were good at careful, repetitive jobs done in small spaces. These women wearing work dungarees are riveting the underside of a bomber. Hair was tucked up in caps or under bandanas to keep it free from machinery and prevent disaster. Norman Rockwell illustrated the most famous riveter. Rosie is posed with her welding goggles and her sandwich, like the prophet Isaiah on Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling. Her penny loafered foot is firmly placed on a copy of Mein Kampf. Before the war, at the end of the 30s, women's fashions were retro-Victorian, with full skirts, large sleeves, and small waists, and upswept hairstyles reminiscent of the 1890s. With the outbreak of war, clothing took a dramatic change. Dresses and women's suits adapted a silhouette of uniforms. Full sleeves remained in the shape of shoulder pads. Waists were still narrow, but skirts were knee-length. Hair remained upswept. In Britain, as bomb shelters were being constructed, siren suits came into fashion. Similar to overalls worn by workers, the siren suit had a zipper front, often a hood, and were worn over nightgowns or pajamas for late-night air raids. Here is a mother and son siren-suited in front of their bomb shelter. Winston Churchill often wore a siren suit, and here is second subaltern Elizabeth Windsor in her military overalls. In Britain, between September 39 and May 41, clothes more than doubled in cost. And on June 1st, 1941, Britain began to ration clothes. The utility clothing scheme controlled this inflation. Cash and coupons from that year were required to buy clothes. The scheme began with 66 coupons per person per year at the beginning of the war, buying one entire outfit. But by the end of the war, only 20 coupons were available for a year. Non-ration clothes could be bought at a jumble sale or a rummage sale, and clothing exchanges were available for families to trade up in size for growing children. Well-established dress designers, limited to specific restrictions, created a small line of good quality, well-built, affordably priced garments. All utility items were marked with the CC41 label, which stood for Controlled Commodity 1941. The CC41 austerity measures for men limited trousers to a 19-inch circumference, no double-breasted suits, no elastic in waistbands, no zippers because of the metal shortage, no metal or leather buttons. No boys under 13 could wear long trousers. No pockets on pajamas, no trouser cuffs. The CC41 limits for women restricted no more fabric than 2 3/4 yards for an overcoat, 2 yards for a suit, 2 yards for a dress. No trim, fancy stitching, or lace on women's undergarments. No metal bones or elastic on corsets or girdles. Skirts and dresses limited to 3 buttons, 6 seams, 2 pleats, and 1 pocket. No metal jewelry. Fashion has slowed to the tempo of a steady marriage, for it takes too many coupons to have clothes with which one falls in and out of love. In the United States, the production board introduced limited order L85. Similar to CC41, L85 reduced the amount of textiles and labor 15%. US manufacturers were restricted with penalties of fines or imprisonment. With the War Production Board yardstick, clothing was carefully measured in production. Decorative styles were only on the front of garments, no big sleeves or all-round pleats, no wide belts. The American men's victory suit had similar limitations to the British. A lesser grade of wool was commonly used, and it was considered patriotic to wear such a suit. In the US, with a focus on the South Pacific, tropical prints were used. This Hawaiian print rayon dress is alive with bold colors, but retains the broad shoulders and narrow waist. Fewer dyes for clothes were available in the UK than the US, but these rayon scarves by Jacquemart could be used as a kerchief or a bandana around the neck. Most Jacquemart prints had colorful, playful war propaganda designs. This home-sewed American pro-British dress has backward, secret writing on it. It can only be read when you look in the mirror. It says, "They'll always be in England." American non-ration shoes utilize non-leather materials. The wedge soles were made out of cork wood or heavy cardboard. The upper parts were canvas, raffia, or jute. In Britain, the utility shoe was a well-constructed, generally lower, and very conservative style. Whereas most garments were rationed, hats were not. They were often made of felt, a non-ration material that could be cut and formed into a variety of whimsical shapes. Another felt hat that was very popular was the beret frequently seen on General Montgomery. In Britain, Make, Do, and Mend was a series of pamphlets from the British Board of Trade, illustrating how to extend the life of clothes, from darning socks to relining pockets or making slippers from old carpets. Women were asked to repair and renovate and were offered ideas for making new clothes out of old. While away in the military, many abandoned suits were taken apart and made into outfits for women and children. Mrs. So-and-so was a recurring character in the Make, Do, and Mend campaign, who instructed how to do specific tasks. Here are instructions how to make those carpet slippers. Other pamphlets gave suggestions on how to reinforce children's clothes or launder the much-needed rayon, or how to replace your coupons and clothes if your home is destroyed in a bombing raid. Women were encouraged to look their best. The Board of Trade tried to make sure that women had access to makeup like lipstick or mascara. The thought that was this could help women feel more normal, give the military a boost, and thumb their nose at their adversaries. These are women in a salon having the makeup on their legs done. One of the most valuable morale boosters in Britain was the royal family. The King and Queen stayed in London during the Blitz, toured the bombed areas, and the Queen dressed in cheerful pastel so as not to seem morose. She was so important for the British morale that Hitler was alleged to have called her the most dangerous woman in Europe. Back to our farm girls. Since I began working on this project, I discovered that the white dress on my Aunt Ethel was her wedding dress from 6 months earlier, and the suit on my Aunt Marie was for her wedding a year earlier. Both of these garments had become their Sunday best. Marie's jacket lapels were carefully made with one layer of wool, no interfacing or facing, with 1/8-inch seam allowance, and the pockets are shaped like chevrons. What lessons can we learn from austerity? I recently watched a World War II American newsreel, and it summed up by saying, don't waste anything, buy only what is necessary, salvage what you don't need, share what you have. Not bad advice for today. With the tightening of our collective belts after the financial crisis of 2008, I found that I was spending my money with more and more care. I too found myself with shrinking resources and expanding needs. I now think of discount stores like Ross and TJ Maxx as high-end. And I shop at thrift shops or the closet of my spare room where I keep old clothes. I also think that collectively, we can change our personal habits and make a significant impact in the use of our resources. And in the spirit of austerity, I'm wearing my Aunt Marie's wedding suit jacket today. Thank you.
Our final presentation will be by Senior Lecturer Dennise Gacksetter. Dennise oversees the art education program in the Department of Art and Design. The title of her talk is Body, Breath, Release.
Have you ever been in conflict with someone you love, like a family member? I was with my father. It began sometime in my early teens. He was very critical, and I never felt good enough. I resented and resisted him. And with every encounter, my resistance grew, and eventually, over time, it grew into a full-blown revolution. When I was 18, I left to go to college in Madison, Wisconsin. And within a year, my parents moved to Southern California, so things got easier because we were far away. However, I still had to spend holidays with my family, and that involved a long car ride from the LAX airport out to the Valley and back. Fortunately, my mom always came along, and that helped things a lot because her physical presence filled the space where the conversation should have been. One Christmas, my mom told me that she couldn't come with us to the airport the next day. That meant that I had to spend nearly an hour in the car alone with my father. Could you imagine how I felt? Yeah. Well, that night, I spent in my head going over the strategies I needed to survive the next day. In the morning, in the car, the silence was so dense, it pinned me in my seat and locked my arms across my chest. Every once in a while, my father would ask me a question, and I answered with curt responses, offering minimal information. He tried several times and eventually just gave up. When we got to the airport, I told him he could just drop me off. I'd been there several times, knew how to get my way around and check in. He said, "No, I'd like to walk you to the gate." Well, this was in the 1980s, and you could still do that back then. So he parked the car and escorted me in. When we got to the gate, I said, "You can go now, Dad," and I gave him a quick, compulsory hug. He said, "Would you like to go get a cup of coffee?" I said, "No, thanks," and I went and sat down. He came over and sat down right next to me. I mean, he wasn't getting the message. What was the deal? I fumed with anger. I felt trapped, and I pulled myself in tighter. We sat there side by side, not saying a word. All at once, after a while, I felt how tense my body was, and I sensed how much energy I was using to create and hold it. It was exhausting. I exhaled and felt some of the tension release. And I glanced over at my father, and what I saw startled me. What I saw was a tired old man, sad and somewhat defeated. My heart quivered. It was a very small but profound moment. So carefully, in a quiet voice, I asked him if he still wanted to go get coffee. And he looked at me, surprised, and nodded. What followed was a very long, challenging conversation, filled with awkward moments of silence and quite clumsy attempts to connect. But we did it, and we survived. So the next time that you find yourself with conflict with someone, if you can, for just a moment, get out of your head and into your body. It's so simple if you can remember it. So try this with me. Make a fist. Okay, make a fist. Now, feel your body. Can you sense the tension in your arms, your hands, maybe even your face and your neck? Can you sense all the energy it takes to create that? Now notice your breath and exhale and let some of the tension release. You don't have to release all of it. Even the smallest amount of release will allow a gap in your resistance. And it is that small opening that invites you to be present to the moment and begin. I hope that you can accept that invitation. Thank you.
Once again, I'm Kathy PUZEY, and on behalf of the Kane College of the Arts, we'd like to thank you for joining us this evening. Please join us again next week at the same time.
CCA Presents is made possible by the support of our generous donors. To make a tax-deductible donation, please visit cca.usu.edu/giving. Thank you.